September 2, 2024. London Stansted Airport. Border Force officers intercept 2 passengers arriving from Bangkok. Inside their luggage, tightly wrapped packages. When opened, the room fills with the scent of cannabis, over 60 kilograms, worth more than £600,000. 2 women are detained on the spot. But as investigators dig deeper, they uncover a name that shocks British football fans. A man once hailed as one of Arsenal's brightest young stars. J. Emmanuel-Thomas. How did a Premier League prospect, a player once compared to the likes of Thierry Henry, end up coordinating a drug smuggling network from Thailand to London? And what drove him to recruit his own girlfriend to carry out the risky run? Stories like this don't just happen in headlines. They happen in silence, until the handcuffs click. Subscribe now, before the next downfall is someone you actually know. J. Emmanuel-Thomas was born in Forest Gate, East London, in 1990, a place where dreams and pressure live side by side. From the moment he could walk, football wasn't just a game. It was his ticket out. By age 8, he was already part of Arsenal's academy, one of the most respected youth systems in the country. Coaches described him as powerful, gifted, and a natural leader. He captained the under-18s at just 16, guiding them to a double under Arsene Wenger's watchful eye. But early success doesn't always translate into longevity. Despite the talent, breaking into Arsenal's first team proved harder than anyone expected. Loan spells followed: Blackpool, Doncaster Rovers, and Cardiff City, a journey many called promising but unfulfilled. In 2011, he made a permanent move to Ipswich Town, then to Bristol City, where fans briefly reignited his story. At his best, he was unplayable: strength, skill, and flair. But as the years rolled by, something started to fade. After leaving Bristol, his career became a trail of short-term contracts: Milton Keynes Dons, Gillingham, QPR. Each new club meant another chance, and another goodbye. Behind the matchday highlights, life grew less stable. Lower league wages couldn't match the early expectations of a Premier League life. Financial strain, career uncertainty, and the quiet loss of fame all began to weigh heavy. He'd once stood shoulder to shoulder with stars like Jack Wilshere and Kieran Gibbs. But while their names stayed in stadium lights, he slipped into the shadows of the football pyramid. And when the cheers fade, desperation whispers. For J. Emmanuel-Thomas, that whisper would soon become a choice, one that would change everything. By 2023, J. Emmanuel-Thomas's football journey had stalled. After brief spells in Scotland and Thailand, he found himself without a contract, and without direction. For a player once tipped for Premier League glory, the silence after the final whistle was deafening. Public records and court documents later revealed that during this period, J began spending extended time in Thailand, a country where he'd previously played for JDT in Malaysia's top division and built connections across Southeast Asia. But as his playing career faded, those connections began to shift from footballing circles to far more dangerous ones. According to evidence presented in court, Emmanuel-Thomas became involved in a smuggling plot that promised easy profit. The plan was simple, on paper. Ship cannabis from Thailand to the UK under the cover of gold imports. Less risk, quick returns, and a desperate man willing to believe it was worth it. Investigators say he reached out to people he trusted, or thought he could control. Among them was his partner, Yasmin Pietroska, and her friend Rosie Rowland. To them, it sounded legitimate, just a favor for J. Flights, hotel stays, and instructions that sounded rehearsed. But behind the calm messages and reassurances, he already knew the truth. What was packed into those suitcases wasn't gold. It was nearly 60 kilograms of cannabis, hidden, wrapped, and tagged for delivery into Britain. Messages recovered later showed him guiding every move, tracking their flights, giving coded updates, and keeping a watchful eye from abroad. As the women boarded their flight home, a larger web was already in motion, one woven quietly across continents. According to evidence later presented in court, the operation traced its roots to Thailand, a known source country for large-scale cannabis exports disguised as legitimate goods. The route was deliberate: Bangkok to Dubai, then onward to London Stansted. A corridor that smugglers often viewed as clean, until this case proved otherwise. Investigators from the National Crime Agency and UK Border Force pieced together what prosecutors called a coordinated importation conspiracy. At its centre, not a faceless trafficker, but a man once celebrated in football stadiums. J. Emmanuel-Thomas, ex-Arsenal, ex-Premier League promise, is now running logistics for a £600,000 drug shipment. Publicly, Jay's life still looked intact. His Instagram page told a different story: smiles in the sun, motivational captions, and photos that hinted at peace. But behind those posts, phone logs showed something else: encrypted calls, hidden chats, and transfers that connected him to suppliers overseas. He coordinated everything, from the pickup in Thailand to who handled the bags to when the couriers would land. In court, prosecutors said he had an operational management function, words that meant control, authority, and deliberate planning. Behind closed doors, paranoia began to creep in. One contact in Thailand went silent for days. A courier reported nervous looks at check-in. Jay started using burner phones, each discarded after a single trip. Then came the messages that chilled investigators later: short, coded, emotionless. "It's done. Keep quiet. Wait for confirmation." Yet, even as the pressure mounted, he kept up appearances. To family and fans, he was still the footballer between contracts. To his couriers, the businessman with a plan. But the truth was slipping. His world was splitting in two, one public, polished, smiling. The other, cracking under the weight of fear and deceit. Unknown to Jay, investigators were already watching. Weeks before the women even flew out, Border Force had flagged their travel pattern: short turnaround, identical luggage, and one-way bookings from Bangkok. Each time they checked in, their names quietly pinned a watch list. The airport didn't just wait for their arrival, it prepared for it. Jay thought he'd built a foolproof system. Untraceable, airtight, invisible. But every encrypted message left a shadow. And every shadow was being followed. When the plane landed at Stansted, the women believed they were walking into payday. Jay believed he was moments from profit. But for Border Force, it was showtime. Right now, someone else is living this exact lie, smiling on social media while risking prison behind the screen. Hit subscribe before their story ends up here next. By the time the plan was fully in motion, J. Emmanuel-Thomas had become more than just a middleman. He was the quiet conductor of a dangerous symphony. Routes were mapped out: Thailand to Dubai, then the UK. Every flight, every hotel booking, every transfer carefully spaced to look ordinary. But ordinary doesn't last long when money moves in the shadows. Behind the layers of fake paperwork and coded calls, a network began to stretch further than anyone imagined. Couriers were recruited through friends of friends, people who didn't ask questions and just followed instructions. A chain built on trust, or fear, depending on who you asked. Each courier knew only their piece of the puzzle. None saw the full picture, except him. Messages flew across encrypted chats: package confirmed. Pickup smooth. Exchange clean. Short, cold updates from people who spoke in code and vanished after each job. And through it all, Jay watched from afar, the one thread connecting them all. Money trickled in small amounts, sent through multiple accounts, disguised under harmless labels. It was a system designed to look legitimate, until someone looked closer. On the surface, he lived the same calm life. Smiling in photos. Posting highlights from his football days. To anyone scrolling past, he looked like a man who'd simply stepped away from the game. But off-camera, paranoia was tightening its grip. Friends noticed he was distracted. He'd double-check locks, glance over his shoulder, and hesitate before answering his phone. Sometimes he'd stop mid-sentence, as if he'd just heard something no one else did. That's what living two lives does, one public, one buried under lies. The deeper he went, the smaller his world became. He trusted fewer people. Calls grew shorter. Sleep came harder. And in the silence, the doubt began to speak louder than reason. Whispers reached him: someone talking too much, a courier asking the wrong question, a transfer that didn't clear on time. He told himself it was nothing. That everything was still under control. But even he could feel it, something was closing in. He thought the plan was invisible. He thought his distance made him untouchable. But the truth was already moving toward him, quietly, methodically, and far too close to escape. Every network has a breaking point. For J. Emmanuel-Thomas, it began the moment 2 return tickets from Bangkok appeared on a National Crime Agency watch list. Behind airport scanners and quiet desks, a team was already waiting, tracking names, flight paths, and luggage tagged before the passengers even boarded. The operation that once felt invisible was now being watched from every angle. As the flight touched down in London, agents shadowed the passengers from gate to customs. The suitcases looked ordinary. Black, hard-shell cases, the kind millions travel with every day. But inside, the layers told a different story: 60 kilograms of compressed cannabis, wrapped in foil and hidden beneath false panels. In a single moment, the illusion shattered. 2 women detained. Phones seized. Bags secured and logged as evidence. And just like that, the quiet web that Jay had built began to unravel. Digital forensics moved fast. Every message, every call, every bank transfer, nothing stayed secret for long. Text records revealed planning and coded exchanges, financial data exposed who paid for what and when. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just quiet proof stacking higher by the hour. Back in Scotland, Jay was still trying to keep the illusion alive. He answered casual messages, liked posts online, and tried to look normal. But the silence from Thailand was different now. The calls stopped. The familiar signals never came. He must have felt it, the weight of something closing in. One morning, the quiet ended. A knock at the door in Gurok. Not teammates. Not reporters. National Crime Agency officers. Neighbors watched as plainclothes detectives led him out of his home. No headlines yet, no public shame, just flashing lights, the click of handcuffs, and the end of the double life he'd tried to protect. Within hours, the world found out. Greenock Morton Football Club issued a statement, contract terminated with immediate effect. The man once known for Premier League promise was now the face of a criminal investigation. Clubs distanced themselves. Former teammates stayed silent. The fall from grace was complete and merciless. He'd hoped to escape prosecution's net. But in his own words, his own recruitment, and his own routine, he left a breadcrumb trail. And now, the net was closing in. By the spring of 2025, the story that began with football glory and faded into quiet shadows reached its final chapter. The case, months in the making, had moved from whispers in locker rooms to the echo of footsteps in a courtroom. The man once known for his powerful strikes and effortless composure now stood before a judge, not as an athlete, but as a defendant. May 2025. Chelmsford Crown Court. The courtroom was packed. Journalists lined the benches, pens ready, cameras waiting outside. There was no bravado, no swagger. J. Emmanuel-Thomas spoke softly, admitting guilt to importing a controlled drug, a charge that carried the full weight of the law. As the prosecution read the facts, the reality of his empire unraveled in public view: the £600,000 shipment of cannabis, the coded messages, and the failed attempt to outsmart a system that had already been watching him. The courtroom was silent, save for the shuffle of papers and the faint hum of fluorescent lights above. When the judge began to speak, the air grew heavy. Judge Timothy Mills, calm, precise, and unflinching, delivered his words like a verdict carved in stone: "You were once known as a footballer. You will now be known as a criminal." It was a sentence that carried more weight than any number, for years in prison, but a lifetime of consequences that no appeal could undo. The gavel came down, and with it, the career that once began at Arsenal's Hale End Academy was reduced to a headline. From youth stardom under Arsene Wenger's watchful eye to a cell behind reinforced steel doors, it was a fall so steep that even those who barely remembered his name couldn't help but feel the sting of disbelief. In the weeks that followed, his name vanished from club websites and team sheets. Sponsorships dissolved. Contacts who once chased him for interviews went silent. The world that had once cheered him on now watched from a distance, unsure whether to condemn him or feel sorry for him. Those who'd known him said he kept to himself, quieter, more guarded. The confidence that once defined him had faded, replaced by a tone of reflection. He'd talk about mistakes, about choices made too quickly, about trust given to the wrong people. His life was no longer measured in goals or trophies, but in lessons, harsh, public, and irreversible. Each passing day served as a reminder of how easily a moment of control can turn into a lifetime of consequences. As the headlines faded and the world moved on, one question lingered: was this the end of his story, or the beginning of a man finally forced to confront what he'd become? 10 months after his conviction, Emmanuel-Thomas was quietly released on parole, his 4-year sentence reduced through good behavior and time served. No cameras waited at the gate. No reporters shouted his name. The man who once walked into Premier League stadiums beneath roaring crowds now stepped into a world that had already moved on. He returned to Scotland, not to football pitches, but to anonymity. There were whispers of him training again, trying to find rhythm and redemption away from the spotlight. But no club came forward. No offers. The game that once defined him had shut its doors. Meanwhile, the 2 women arrested at Stansted Airport, Yasmin Pietroska and Rosie Rowland, also walked free. Their defense had always been that they were misled and told they were carrying gold back from Thailand. The courts accepted that their involvement was born of trust and deception, not greed. They returned to their lives, scarred, but spared the long sentences that might have followed. As for Emmanuel-Thomas, the headlines faded, replaced by quiet speculation. Would he rebuild, or had the label of a drug smuggler erased every chance of a comeback? Behind closed doors, he stayed silent. No interviews. No public apology. Just fragments, a deleted Instagram post here, a rare sighting there. For someone who once thrived in the limelight, invisibility became both punishment and refuge. In the months following his release, the National Crime Agency issued statements warning of how organized crime targets individuals with fading fame, people who've lost structure, income, or direction. For them, the slide isn't always dramatic. Sometimes, it's as simple as a phone call from an old contact and the promise of fast money. And that's what this story became, a symbol of how fame without foundation can collapse into desperation. A reminder that the spotlight doesn't just expose success, it also magnifies failure. In the end, Emmanuel-Thomas's legacy isn't found in goals or matches, but in the cautionary tale he now represents. From Arsenal's Hale End Academy to a cell in Chelmsford, his journey is a portrait of potential lost, and the quiet question of whether redemption is still possible. Because when the fame fades, the temptations remain. And for those unprepared for life beyond the game. Crime doesn't always chase the desperate, sometimes, it waits for them. Emmanuel-Thomas once walked off the pitch with promise, but behind the cheers was a choice that cost him everything. Was his downfall unique, or just another sign of how easily potential can be lost when the spotlight fades? Talent never guarantees stability. When fame disappears, desperation often takes its place, and the decisions made in those quiet moments echo far beyond the headlines. If this story made you think, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next truth might be closer than you realize.